Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Peggy Fucillo, and she's going to tell us about why and when and what she's found in researching her roots. So welcome, Peggy. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, actually.
That's great. That's great. Not everybody's thrilled to see me, so I appreciate that.
Well, like I said, I like the background. That's my neighborhood. So, yeah, I wanted to honor, I guess, my parents because there is so much that we have to pass down because we're the last generation really that can do that. Mm-hmm. And it's given me the opportunity when I started this, and I started it a long time ago, that I'm in the process, like you, of writing a book. Purpose was to tell stories, like vignettes, of the different parts of my family that I knew. And I knew only one grandparent, but my mother was like the storyteller, and my grandmother was the storyteller. My maternal, she's the only one I knew. Everybody had grandparents had died before I came along. And my mother had so many documents, which I can show later, but she also had pictures. She chronicled her life, and that made me, and I have documents of property that we owned from Macedonia, which is where my grandfather was from. And it was just, she kept everything. So, and she would tell me periodically when she dug it up, I might have been 5 years old or 6 years old, and there it was in front of me. So when I was in grad school, we did a project, and it was before Anthony Riccio was there. Unfortunately, we would have, if it was a little bit later, we would have connected. And it was oral history in the North End, and it was regarding the political views of women. And I had, back then we taped things, we didn't video them, so yeah. We taped. And I really got interested in the people. And it was all my mother's friends. It was nobody that I didn't know, but I got interested in the people's ideas of why they voted, how excited they were to vote. Because we're talking way back when women got the vote in 1920, but I was talking to people that started voting at that time. And it was amazing to see the enthusiasm that the North End had for the political system at that point in time. And the people that I know today in the North End still have that. So
what year was that? About what year was that?
When I started that, 78, yeah. 77.
Oh, so almost around the same time as Anthony. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so I have all of that. And then actually, it had to be a little bit before because my mother died in 76. So she had all these papers. So I have them all. I'm going through them, and I'm trying to put them in order. And right now I'm looking in my living room, and I have like a whole bunch on the wall and framed. And when Ancestry came, and my relatives were, of that generation were dying off, I had nothing other than Ancestry, except I had one, my Uncle Tony. He died in 2008, 2 months shy of 100. So he was the historian of the family. He, in fact, even was at the molasses flood and the late teens in Boston as a kid. They followed the fire trucks, because it was something to do. They were on horses and stuff, the fire truck. And it was a huge event in Boston. Many people got killed. So he was able to tell me that firsthand. That's like an incredible type of thing of oral history. So talking to him, I got a lot of stories because he was best friends with my father. And I really didn't know much about my father. I knew everything about my mother's side of the family, but not much about my father's. And that was because he was born in 1898. And he was a change of life baby. So between him and his 3 older brothers, there was like 18 years difference in the second brother.
Yeah.
And the first brother was born in 1875. And they all came here from Italy. And the town's in the back. And Cusano de San Domenico. And I've never been there. I've been everywhere. I've stayed in my mother's, in the summertime, my mother's village. It's actually a little city. This is a village. I mean, it's very small. And, but it just, through my travels in Italy in the 70s and 80s, I just developed, it was just in me. Now I have, my first cousin could care less. I'll say,
well, yeah, I know.
Yes, and nothing. It's nothing.
I know, and we all kind of have that thing. Everybody in my family too. They're like, what are you looking for that stuff? And then when you find something a little interesting, maybe they'll pique their interest for a bit, and then they go back to, well, you're doing all of that kind of stuff. And so there seems to be 1 or 2 of us in every family.
Yeah, and actually, my cousin's son is very interested in this, and which I'm glad, because he's obviously younger than me, and he'll pass it on to his kids, whether they're interested or not. And I'll pass it on to my daughter, and she actually is interested in it. I'm going to show a video a little later, and she was so interested in the heritage. And part of the heritage, I'm going to say, is food, is tradition during celebrations, like Easter. Easter is very big. It's bigger than Christmas for us. And I noticed that she started making pizzagena and pizza ricotta, and I'm like, she couldn't boil water. And all of a sudden, now she's making this for Easter in her own home. So things stuck into her, and it's good. It's good that the traditions are passed down, and it's good that the history and even the nuances of what happened when, I think they're really important. For example, when I go by my house, which we sold in the 50s actually, sold it to Tony DeMarco, who was a famous fighter from the North End, from Fleet Street. And he just passed away. He's got statues and everything in the North End. He's very beloved. And I'll take my daughter by it, and I'll see that sign, plaque up at the top. It says 1893. Well, 1893 was the date, obviously, that the tenement was built. Mm-hmm. It was also my grandfather bought that building. He was the first person.
Really? Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I didn't know that until I started. I mean, I knew we were there in 1930, not I was, but in 1935 and something like that. But I didn't realize that until I started looking at census, and everybody in the world, unless they were lying, 19 Fleet Street, you'll see on the census. So the whole family on the 4 floors, they all came and they all lived there.
Wow, that's something. So your grandfather bought that building. How did he have the money to buy a building? This is that chain migration, right? He came first. He did not read or write English, or Italian. Well, he spoke, of course. Right, but
he was not educated. He was born in 1849. He came here in 1886, and by himself. His wife and 3 children were still in Italy, in Cusano back there. So he worked. He sent for them the manifest, quite interesting from the post. because one of my uncles is missing. He must have taken the later boat, but or an earlier one that I couldn't find. So they all worked. You had 3 young men working, an older man working, and by 1886 to 93, they were able as a group to buy that tenement.
Wow, that's great. I mean, first of all, that's very early to come. That's way ahead of the curve, that most of us come from. But the fact that they pooled their money and bought a building and everybody lived there that's fabulous.
And soon after, the family, and as I say, my mother told me everything. Well, not everything, but mostly everything, because in my research, I found out a couple of other things that she left out or she didn't know. And the 2 of the brothers, the 2 oldest, no, Luigi stayed here in Boston. And then they did the move. Everybody does the move. There's a certain way, just like they do in New York, that you're in Boston, then you go to Revere or Chelsea, because or Somerville, those are the like. But my 2 uncles went to Rockland. Now, nobody's ever heard of Rockland, even if you live in Massachusetts. I mean, it's a real small place, and it's next to Plymouth, and they moved there. I don't know why. I would love to find out why they went to Rockland, other than maybe there was farming going on. There was no factories, or maybe they were building, there was no railroad. You can't figure out why were they there.
Right, yeah.
And in the 1920s, my uncle, we called him John, because they all anglicized their names, because they came earlier, and that was the way to get ahead, was to anglicize their name.
Yeah. And
my mother's side, no. But he became chief of police of this town. And I knew, this was family history. I didn't have to look it up. But I do have records, that of him being a police. And during the 1920s was Prohibition. And I guess Rockland, being the little town it was out in the middle of nowhere, stills were like a big thing that you could hide. But Uncle John was a steel finder, so he was able to get the stills, arrest the people. You would find all these articles in the newspapers. Chief of Police Fucillo got this family's still, etc. So the story that I have is all about that. And I go, yeah, well, Mom's right. I'm reading it in the Globe, but in the archives. And then I see another story after the last still was found and the liquor was confiscated. The people were in jail. And the next article that I found, because, you just put Fucillo when you get all this stuff on, was Joseph Fucillo arrested for transporting liquor to Boston on the highway. Now, there was no highway then, but, the road that connected the north from the south, Rockland south of Boston. And I'm like connecting dots here, this isn't good. My mother never told me this story. The very next day, there's a retraction by the Globe saying he was not arrested. He was not transporting intoxicating liquor / rum. And we're sorry, whatever the redaction said. But I'm thinking, was because this was common, it's common today for, not legal, but, for police that confiscate things can have a little side job.
Yeah, have a little, yeah.
and I, there's no one I can ask. That's but when I saw that was like the biggest thing I found out that I didn't know, that my father was arrested for taking liquor, probably from Uncle John's confiscated liquor down in Rockland. So, yeah, the things you find out. And my father was a politician, so it became a politician, so it wasn't a very good thing to have on his resume.
No, I guess not. But, there was, like you said, there was a lot of that stuff going on back then,
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But it's funny that you have to wonder about was he really doing it, and they took care of somebody, so there was a retraction, or was he really not doing it?
I go with number one.
So I know you have a little slideshow that you want to show some of the documents and some of the research that you did, right?
Sure. Yeah, I do. Can I say one thing before?
Yeah, sure.
What I have researched before, and when I was in school, was the stress that immigrants went through, and my mother was a victim of that. She came. Well, could I tell the story?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So my grandmother's family came together, which was unusual. They all came, 3 sisters and the mother and father, and they came in 1901. So they were late. My father's side got a head start. And the biggest thing that they had to do with these 3 sisters was get them married, because my grandmother came here when she was born in 1881. So she was 20. She was almost like past prime age of getting married. So the marriages were like, somebody asked you, you go with them. It wasn't nobody made a decision. It was, you're gone. You're out of the house, make your life. Not that they didn't love each other. They were a very loving family, my grandparents, but that was what you had to do to survive. My grandfather, grandfather, I think it's was a boot black. A boot. I didn't know what a boot black was. He shined shoes.
Right, yeah.
And so I don't know where he could have been on a corner. I don't know. But when they were in Italy, my grandmother could read and write. So they were not poor people, but they were not, nobility. But they all decided to come together. Again, I don't know why. Because I know my father's reasons, but the American dream, I guess. But So the first 2 sisters got married. All of them married older men, much older. And then my grandmother got married to a much younger man. She had 2 children very quickly. Infant mortality was tremendously high. So the first child died. Second child, my aunt Sunda, came along. And then my grandfather got diagnosed with TB. And they said, okay, you have to go back to Italy. The air's better. We're in the North End. I mean, the North End at that time had the population density of Calcutta, India. Mm-hmm. So this place, we wanted to get fresh air. Plus the apartments didn't have any air in them either. So what happened is he goes back to Italy. My grandmother's pregnant again. She's got the toddler at this point, and they go back to Italy too, to be with him. And he dies. He dies December 31st of 1911. And my mother was born in Italy, in the town, and 2 days later, January 2nd of 2012. So then we have what happens, it's pre-World War I, and they have to kind of stay in Italy because it's dangerous to travel, and they come back in 1917. And somehow they got her on the ship. I don't know how. She has no records, nothing. I'm sure it was paying whoever, and she got on. She's a baby, Well, she was like 5 at the time. But throughout the whole time she was there, she had no documents. She was just born. As mostly everybody was. I mean, the only documents really at that time were that were kept were church documents.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And So, and she doesn't have anything. But going through her possessions after she died, I find that St. Anthony's in Revere, Massachusetts, has a birth certificate, has a baptismal record for her. Where'd that come from? No, that doesn't make sense. But again, all of these things transpired to make her have status in America. And because here she was. So my grandmother was here with 2 kids, no father, and no money. And my mother would tell me the stories of her coming, which were horrific stories. They had a 2-room apartment on Hanover Street. That apartment doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down, flat on the top floor. And they had no money. They were on what was called relief. Relief is like, I guess we call welfare today.
Yeah.
And that's what they depended on. One of my mother's grandmother's sister moved to Revere and didn't really have anything to do with the family. And my other great aunt, Mariuccia, she had a husband that was less than perfect. She was a victim of domestic abuse, and which was prevalent, by the way. The North End sometimes was self-policing, so he did get a little bit of self-policing because it was known, and he passed that great quality down to my uncle, which we couldn't have anything to do with. But so Mariuccia wanted to give them food. My great uncle Pasquale, he had a meat market in North Square, right near Paul Revere's house. And she wasn't allowed to give her sister any food.
Wow.
He said they have to work for it. So my mother, at age 8, went to work in the meat market for him, sweeping the floor and doing everything so they could get a little food to eat. Ironically, he was the one that gave her away at the wedding. I don't know why, but yeah, but it's very sad. Mariuccia couldn't even talk to Sivangenza, my grandmother. They couldn't talk to each other because of him. So it was the strange, you think of this wonderful, loving family on my father's side.
Yeah, right.
That's why, I'm calling my book or whatever I'm doing, it's the tale of 2 families. One's the haves and one's the have-nots. So my mother's family was the have-nots. They didn't have anything. So let me show you some pictures. And
just real quick before you do that. So how did your mother and father meet?
Good question. Yeah. Okay. We can segue right into that. That's great. So my mother was 14 years younger than my father. My father was born in 1898. She was born in 1912. She happened to be very beautiful. And she got, in the North End, beauty counted for a lot, more than money, especially if you were going to be a politician. So he was looking, I think, they knew each other because they were both from the same area in Italy, but they congregated together. Like my grandmother and his mother were friends. So that's kind of how, but there was just a certain age group that would all be together, and he was older, as my uncle was. My Uncle Tony was his best friend. And they got together that way. And I say in one of my stories is that my mother hit the North End social elite jackpot. She married the Kennedys of the North End, although there were other Kennedys there too. But to marry a family that had a house, to marry a family that at that time had a car, this was huge. and had money, money coming in, because she had nothing. She graduated school though in 8th grade, but nobody went to school after that. It was very rare for a woman to go to school after 8th grade. In fact, a lot of women, again, in what I know from oral history, et cetera, they got married right after 8th grade, what we would consider 9th grade, 14 or 15 years old. My mother didn't get married till 23. That was like a big deal.
Yeah.
So I can show you that now.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is my mother when she first came. Little bit of a thing. This is her kindergarten picture. She's right here. She's really loving the picture.
So now that's really something to have a picture like that. What year is this? Like 1916 or 7, something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
When she first came. Now, none of these clothes are hers. They were all given by the relief station. She is, this is probably my most treasured picture.
Absolutely, sure.
She went to the parochial school, but this is kindergarten. They didn't have that. So this was Boston Public School. And she had a teacher named Bertha K. Rice. And she remained friends with that teacher until the day she died, until my mother died, because Miss Rice outlived her.
Wow.
And came to my mother's funeral. And I have a tea set. I should have it here, but I don't. A very small tea set that she gave my mother. My mother didn't have a thing. So they had a very strong bond. And back then, teachers didn't get married. She remained, lived with her sister. I would visit her because my mother would pack up a whole bunch of stuff and say, bring this to Miss Rice, for Christmas or for whatever. So that's kindergarten. A big thing was to get family photos, right? So somebody paid for this. They didn't have money. None of these clothes are theirs. The studio would give the clothes, just like you go to the studios today, you could dress up like in the olden days.
Right, yeah.
So here's that. This is my mom. And I call her Sivincenza because everybody calls her Sivincenza, but she's my nonna. And this is Asunda. And they're 3 years apart. This is them a little older. This is first communion for my mother. And this is her. She looks older than this, but she's like 16 or 17 in this picture as a bridesmaid.
Yeah, I have a picture of my grandmother too. When I think she's about 17, and they looked a lot older back then.
Yeah, they sure did. And this is the wedding. This is going to be her, one of her in-laws. So they were friendly at that point. This, if you were from the North End, you would say, you could take my mother out of the picture and it looks exactly the same.
Yeah,
nothing
how about that?
In this picture. And this was, 1928, something like that. Mm-hmm. And my mother, again, they lived in 2 apartments, but she had, this is where they got air. This is up on the roof. She had 3 Spitz dogs, my grandmother, 3 Spitz in two rooms. Somebody gave him the dogs. My mother was an animal lover. I guess that's why I have a rescue. But she had 3 Spitz dogs. She started working outside of my uncle's store. That stopped after 8th grade. She worked for Hood's, which was the biggest H.B. Hood and Son in Charlestown, which is next to the North End. And she milk and ice cream, etc. Mm-hmm. Another picture of her. This is my grandfather, excuse me. This is my father when he was younger. This is his mother and father before they died. This would be late 20s, early 30s. This is my grandmother in the 20s with her daughter, Josie. She and I were very close. Wonderful woman. And she was usually, like in a large Italian family on my father's side, that one of the daughters would take care of the mother, not get married, etc. This was Josie. She was, everybody in the family was Giuseppina, okay? Giuseppe, when you look at the family tree, these are two Giuseppinas, right? And then we got, so here's a Fleet Street sign, very famous. This is the building they bought, and this is when getting married. Now, this is the sister of the other woman in the other picture. This is my father, obviously, and the best man. So when you think of it, my mother had absolutely nothing, and she gets this wedding, at the Copley Plaza, which would be like,
sure. And, sure. I mean, you could see just from the way they're dressed and everything,
Yeah, and I love this picture also because there's one guy that just doesn't look like the other. Like when I showed this picture to Gabri, my daughter, I said that sesame string, all of these things belong together. Yeah. One of them is not the same. So this was one of the state troopers. My father was a state trooper because he was the chauffeur for Governor Curley, which was the start of his political career. So then we have the brothers. There's 4 brothers, and my Uncle Pasquale that we don't like to talk about. And then my Uncle Tony is right here. The love of my life. And here is my mom. And they say at the bottom, I don't think I can make this bigger, but they go to Bermuda for their honeymoon. I mean, this is like, how does this happen?
Yeah, that's incredible. So what year is this?
1935.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, 1935. She's 23. This is a picture of my father because he's running for state senator. He was, I think, the second Italian to run. He didn't win, but he ran. This is my mother. My mother, like I said, was beautiful. And she, at the times, everybody liked having their hair done. So wherever she went, like once a week. I don't think she went once a week, but, wealthier people did. And she, they liked her hair so much, they would pay her to get her, for her hair to be done. And then she got the free hair, and they put the picture in the front of the store in the window, so people would come in and get their stuff.
Wow, cool. That's cool. That's very cool.
This is my godmother. This is my first birthday party. This is in the North End apartment that had 4 rooms, indoor bathroom. This is my Mariuccia. And the one that tried to give us the food, the husband wouldn't let her do. My 2 cousins and my Auntie Anna, Uncle Tony's wife. This is my grandmother. Again, she died. She was born in 1881 in June, and she died December of 1965. And full circle, here's my Uncle Tony with my daughter Gabriella.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's a great picture.
The strongest bond you ever would see, And, she didn't have a grandfather, as I didn't, but it was Grandpa, Uncle Tony. That's that. I can just show you a couple of pieces of research.
Do that too. I mean, those are great. I can't believe that you have your mother's kindergarten picture. That's incredible. Yeah. I didn't even know they took pictures back then.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Okay, so starting off with, in case people don't know where I'm from, we're down here in Campania. Italy is divided into 20 regions, which is like our states, and Sardinia and Sicily are autonomous, but we're from Campania. And Naples is the capital. So when everybody came over here, that's where they came from.
Right.
So this is me with, this goes back to, let's see if I can move this so I can see what I'm doing. Nope, I can't. Anyway, it goes back to the 1700s. What was very difficult was that you can see the name of my grandfather is Theodore. My grandmother was Josephine, not Giuseppina, not Teodoro. They changed their name. But when they came here, they were Teodoro and Giuseppina, and they had their records from Italy. So trying to mesh that, plus the manifests of the ships murdered their names.
Sure, right.
Fucillo was like, here they put one C, but it's really two C's when you go another place. It's Ucillo with an I. Sometimes it's with a T. So it's difficult to look it up. And then this takes some doing, okay?
Yes, I know.
This is Antedante, because I wanted to get to Leonardo. So I find out through I found my grandmother's on the side. This is a big family in the north end, the Ropuccis. Okay, and so for them to marry each other, it's like, makes sense. The Cataldos is another big family, and they all came from Cusano. And depending on where you were from the north end, they said Cusano with the sh sound, because Sicilians would have the sh, and they live right next to Sicilians, so the dialects are important too. So I finally find, I'm looking for Luigi, right? I know he's born in 1809. So I get the registry from 1809. I go to the birth records. I can't read this. There's no way I can read this. I can read the Italian, but I can't read the writing. So I'm looking for Rapucci. So finally I find Rapucci, and I'm like so excited. I've got it right here. See, Giovanni Rapucci. Leonardo, here he is. And the wife, Carmina Luongo. So that was, and I had to go through all it. Fortunately, he was on page 10, so it wasn't that bad. But I started from the back. So, and then I wanted to go one generation above that. This one was harder. And let me go back to,
actually, that handwriting's not too bad. Some of them write like me, which is horrible. But
oh, okay. Well, I have documents that are originals that are. I have no idea. Even my neighbor, who is recently from here, from the 50s, he was educated in Italy. He can't read it either. This is. I have to see where she is. Okay, Maddalena. So I'm looking for her, Cataldo. So I'm trying to find Cataldo because that's the only thing I can find. But no, I find Maria, which was a common first name, and then you got your name.
Right, then
Maria,
you got your name.
Somebody, Maria this, Maria that. So here's Maria Maddalena. So from that, I was able to get the mother and father, Pasquale, Cataldo, etc. But it's difficult, and you have to be diligent. Because the pages of the one book will end in 1909, but have the first page of, 1809, and have the first page of 1810.
Yeah.
So if you go to the 1810 book, you're not going to find anything. So anyway. So
occasionally you get the ones that actually have the registry in it, and you could go there and find the page. But when they don't, I know what you mean.
It's sometimes in the front, sometimes in the back.
Yeah, that's right.
Alphabetical by first name, sometimes not alphabetical. It's like typically what you think of Italian. Okay, so here's my Josephine Fucillo, not Giuseppina, mother of Joseph Fucillo, my father, governor for James Michael Curley. Now, she is the one that came before. This is a family of the haves, right? She could not read or write, but because they came first, and they were able to, not the first, but before my parents, my mother came, they were in the hierarchy of the North End above it. And she belonged to all the societies of the church. And it's very important. And I'm not sure, if this happens in your area, but the church you attend tells you something about the family. So she went to Sacred Heart Church, which is in North Square, right across from Paul Revere's house. And the older people, the people who had come prior, went to that church because St. Anthony's Church, St. Leonard's Church, downstairs was called St. Anthony, wasn't built yet. So you knew if people were going to Sacred Heart, they'd been here, a long time. So, and she was well liked. 100 people came to the house, and it just says a lot about her that she was revered in the North End. I did not have this. I found this. I forget where. Maybe in the Boston Globe archives, but and again, 19 Fleet Street. And my mother took care of her. She was with her. This is a manifest. Again, this is a good manifest.
Yes, that's a good one. You could read it. Yeah.
Yeah. This is when they went back to Italy. On the Fucillo side, they went back to Italy for something. Somebody must have died. They went back, and then they came back again. This was all in 1903. We've seen that before. This is my grandmother's side of the family, the Iuliuccis. Ironically, you would think that they would mess that name up, but I was able to just go through it really quickly because nobody changed their names. Nobody moved anywhere. They were from a small town called Arola. My cousin tells me he remembers the name by Arola the meatballs. I thought that was hysterical. So here's her birth certificate from this is original, 1881. This is her, my grandmother, married to Michele Toto, and in 1909. And it gives the, parents. If you can get these records that give the parents, that,
Yeah, that's the key. Yeah, sure.
Really helps you. This is interesting. Again, original. I have them. My mother saved everything. During World War II, they wanted all the aliens to become citizens. So she became a citizen. When you became a citizen, you had to read and write back then, and you had to read and write in English. Not so, thank God, anymore. But you can see that my grandmother could write. This is the part where my great grandfather. He was a boot black. So when you get to those, I'm thinking and when he was in Italy, they were the managers in Benevento. They were the managers of a restaurant and or hotel, still not sure. And nobody else knows because my mother knew everything and my Uncle Tony, and they're gone. Of the king, Victor Emmanuel.
Yeah.
It was his place where he went to eat. So, they had a good job, or they even owned it. I don't know, but they had a good job. But he comes here and he's shining shoes.
Shining shoes,
yeah. So here's where you have a bad manifest. So, but here, my family is all down here. All the Iuliuccis are down there. I thought it'd be interesting that the draft card of my father, for World War II, okay, he's 43. They didn't take him.
My grandfather was 60 or 59.
Yeah.
And he had to register for the draft.
Yeah, so there's that. Oh, this is another piece that's great, that if you got the Census of the United States, that one is really detailed, and you can read it.
Yeah.
So you see that here we have Louis, Giuseppina, and it hasn't changed her name yet, Theodore has, Louis has from Luigi, Giovanni changed it from John. He's the chief of police guy. And here's my father. Another surprise. My father was never Giuseppe. He was Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
But on his baptismal record, it's Generoso. Which is Generoso is a name I love. But apparently that was too Italian, and his real name was and then as you go down, they give him like a lot of information. Can you read? Can you write? One of the parts that disturbs me, that would disturb a lot of people now, I think, in the times we live in, is they wanted to know the color of your complexion.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And so in my family, all the 4 brothers had different color complexion. Okay. All right.
Well, my grandfather, my father's father his name was Ubaldo. There's no way to Americanize that.
No. Yeah. These were all, Generoso would have been hard. So it went to Joe. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe Jerry or something. Yeah.
Joe. And you can see, a lot of people were barbers. Mm-hmm. Barbering was a thing. Everybody was a barber because every third store was a barber shop. So before John became chief of police, he was a barber. And my father became a barber as well. Every name and I know this happens in New York because time I spent there, everybody had a nickname. So my father was Joe the Barber for his life. He was Joe the Barber. Didn't matter what he did, he was Joe the Barber. So those are some of the things that I want to talk. Can I talk a little bit about growing up in the North End?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we lived in the tenement. We had, usually the first floor was a store. We had a bakery. Second floor we lived in, but we called it the first floor. The second floor we rented out, and the third floor my grandmother lived in. And when my mother got married, she had everything brand new, like it looked very, very modern for the time. And we had an indoor bathroom. We had appliances that were electric. My grandmother didn't want it changed at all. So she had the black coal stove. She had the isobox. She had the, she did not have a radio, a TV, or a telephone. Never, ever.
Wow.
She died in 1965, ever.
Yeah, wow.
And she just wanted things to be
just the way they were. Yeah.
And this was a step up from the 2-room place that she had before, So she had, this was a palace compared to where she had. But one quick story of her and me, because she'd take care of me, because my mother always worked. She was progressive for her time. And so I was always with Grandma. So one day we go down to Haymarket Square. Haymarket is like the big, huge, at the end of Hanover Street, the main street in the North End. It's a big area where they sell all the food. It's like a farmer's market would be called today.
Yeah,
it still exists today, but
I know it. Yeah.
So I go. She said, "Well, we're going to Haymarket." And I go, "Oh, wow, we're going to Haymarket. This is like huge because we've never been before. She never took me." So, I mean, I've been with my mother, but I hadn't ever been with Grandma. So I go, "Well, what are we going to buy? I want peaches, whatever." She goes, no buy, no buy now. Niente. So I'm like, why are we
going?
Crepes. She wanted crepes, orange crepes, anything that was a crepe. We had to bring them back, as many as you could carry. Like, I'm 5, I maybe could carry one on each hand. She probably had some on her head, whatever. We go back to the apartment, and the kitchens were big. I have to say that about them.
Yeah.
We were on the floor with the hammer and taking the nails out of the crates and then breaking because you can break them.
Yeah.
And then you put them in a box, and the box goes, after you finish it all, the box goes next to the coal stove. But we didn't use coal. We used the wood from the crates.
I knew you were going to get there.
How did you know? Did
when you said you started breaking them up, I said they're going in the stove. Where else could they go?
She would not spend money. And she didn't have money, you see, when she came. So that
that was the mentality. Yeah.
My mother had, was probably eating filet mignon downstairs. But my mother comes home, to get me to go downstairs, and she's going, "Kefa," she's like, my mother was a screamer. We were known to scream, and they're going back and forth and cursing each other and everything. And, you can't let my daughter do this. She's got, and I had splinters and, bruises. And she goes, but I need it for the stove. And she's going, Ma, you don't need the stove. You can get a new stove. No, I never had a hammer. We never did it again. The hammer was taken out of my head. So these are the stories that I love because, number one, I remember them, but the nuance is of the back and forth between my mother and my grandmother were so different because her growing out of the poverty when she married my father, not sensing, or I think she did, that how my grandmother still felt trapped in that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's
that poverty. She would not. If you would go to a store, like the green grocer, you'd go there, and she'd be like bickering, and everybody did. I mean, they all bicker back and forth, but no, she'd go for the tomato that was bruised. That they had a giveaway, that they had a giveaway because it was going to go in the heat, so she was very, very much caught up in that. And that's the part where there was so much, what we would call it now, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah,
it was a lot of that, and my mother had it too. My mother, not... the reverse. She was the one with the charge cards. She was the one she had the first TV in the North End. My mother was just completely opposite. And you could see by the pictures, that. And she, when we went to visit the Fucillos, don't talk, don't open your mouth, sit there straight, because the have-nots were visiting the haves. And there was such a class distinction that the Fucillos didn't have, but it was in my mother's head.
Yeah.
She was never good enough.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that. I never experienced that kind of thing. But I looking back, there is a real difference between my father's mother. I never knew my grandfather. He died when I was just a baby. And my mother's mother. My mother's family were farmers from Torito, Bari. And it was just a festival every time you saw. My grandmother wanted nothing but her grandchildren around. It was, loud. And my father's mother came from two, extremely noble families. And not that she didn't love us or anything, but it was a whole different atmosphere. You sat, you listened. It wasn't loud, where my grandmother, my mother's mother was loud and everybody was, boisterous and things like that. So I know exactly what you mean. There was a difference. And it
was in my mother's head. They actually were not, they were not loud. I never heard one of them swear ever, but it wasn't what you would think, like, sitting in church type of thing.
Yeah.
They were full of love. They were wonderful people. They were, haughty or something. No, and they were people in the North End that were like that, believe me.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. there's
And
people
they
like
all
that
went
everywhere.
to Sacred Heart. And if you went to my mother wouldn't let me go in the church. We went to St. Leonard's, and we went downstairs. We went to the downstairs church. Oh, it was a class distinction. And then, of course, there was also how you spoke Italian.
Yes. Oh, yeah. My parents used to fight all the time. Oh, who was speaking the right Italian?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, because it was Naples versus Puglia. You know, body is completely different language, and you know.
The two towns can have.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I was talking to my cousin the other day, who grew up on Hanover Street. Now I'm like one block up and a side street over, how we grew up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said, just a little simple thing. How do you say come here? And she says, oh, veni qua. And I go, no, I grew up saying veni qua. And
Yeah.
it's where you lived and the people around you, how they lived. Now, we're the same family, so this is like the people that in Italy would have talked the same, like
Yeah,
our grandparents. But when you're in a neighborhood, it gets mixed. And we were next to the Sicilians, so we got the mixture.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
There's a whole book, probably more than one, just about different accents.
You know, my mother's Uncle Dominic was Zimanguch. Yeah, that's the way they said. That was Uncle Zimanguch.
Oh,
You know, but that was
like
the Bare's dialect.
Like that's like
Yeah. It's the same thing, but they didn't say zia zio. You know, it was just all strung like that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And my uncle Giovanni. I mean, we called him Uncle John, but he was the only one he was left in Italy when my grandparents came. He was 35 when he came to America with his family. But they used to call him Juan.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way they pronounced it. They didn't say Giovanni or Giovan. It was Juan, like that, almost like a whole different thing. Well, listen, this has been absolutely fascinating. I love the pictures. I love the stories. We're going to have, when the book, when you do the book, we'll have to do another one to make sure we get the book out there.
Sure. Can I just do one more thing?
Yeah.
You want to know about the North End? Oh, I can't do this. Oh, there. Can you see?
I could see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any book by Anthony Riccio, and I have one more from. There we go.
There you go.
From the North End. The mailbox tell you the whole story.
Yeah, and I'll add some of Anthony's pictures to the blog too, and where to find the books so people can buy the books, because they are great stories and great books. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll do it again.
We will.